6:04, August 5th, 2019, Select Board meeting. Call the meeting to order. So, one item agenda, the 6 p.m. Village Wastewater System Ordinance. David Marshall's here. Would you like to lead us through a discussion of what we all have in our packets?
Sure. Again, for the record, I'm Dave Marshall from the Wastewater Committee. I also have other members here to help me through the process. With the package of information that was submitted by the committee to the Select Board, there was a cover letter that indicated that there were a number of items. There were two draft ordinances. One is an allocation ordinance, where applicants come before the board to request access to the municipal sewer allocated components of the municipal sewer system. And then there's also a sewer use ordinance, where once you are allowed to tie into the system, then these are the rules of how you are expected to operate within that particular system. To assist in basically absorbing the information in these two ordinances, we have a frequently asked questions document that poses a question, tries to answer the question as far as those most popular items that we believe the public would normally be asking. We have a process summary document that was intended to allow anybody who's coming in off the street to, rather than trying to absorb every page of the ordinances, to at least understand the steps that take you through the initial application process and subsequent reviews by the Select Board and ultimately the issuance of a connection permit. Also, we included a cost summary that was basically to try to give you a feeling on where the proposed connection fee costs and operation costs would be in relationship to what surrounding communities are charging for similar services. And underlying all of that, a basis of cost for those cost recommendations, which kind of identify how the costs were calculated so that we could get a better understanding of those basis of the values that are have been included in the package for the Select Board. A lot of information to be included here. The committee spent a lot of time basically going through the different ideas, and it has morphed substantially from the previous committee's ideas on how to handle certain items of both the allocation and use ordinances. It has been simplified from the original draft work that had been prepared by the previous committee. And with that, we appreciate Fritz Tegat's guidance in regards to issues associated with items that you wrestle with on an everyday basis, being our representatives of the Select Board for the town. So with that being the overarching introduction, I guess the question would be, how would you like us to proceed? How would you like to have the discussion proceed with regard to the documents that were provided to the Select Board in preparation for this meeting?
People with that? Preferences?
Well, the first thing I would say is thank you. You know, who knew this was such a sexy idea? Thank you for all the time and effort.
Thank you very much for your time, but really have to thank all the committee members that assisted in the process. It was definitely, it was a labor, but it was a labor of love, because we know that, well, certainly we felt that it was a tool that we felt that was appropriate for the town in support of the guidance set forth in the town plan with regard to ultimately the goals of trying to make the villages, areas as vibrant as possible.
I think I'd have a couple of comments to start here. One was, I was tasked my first year with the Select Board of taking up Winslow's subject, or this particular subject that was on his roster. From the beginning, when I started looking at it, it struck me how much time and effort that the town has put into zoning and conditional use permits and all classifications of business district, for this particular area, which were all pretty useless unless people could have toilets for their buildings. So this is, I think, an important tool to allow all of the, year after year, all of the desires and the zoning for stuff. I think this is a tool to allow that to move forward. And I think one of the subjects that I was focused on during this most recent process was the complaints or the comments that I heard that, well, we're not supposed to give this away. And that, I think, for me, was an overarching subject. And I think when you read this, you'll find that the town is certainly not giving away anything. They're charging for it. They're making sure that it's used in an effective manner. It continues to be, to fund itself. You look at Thompson's Point as a good example. There was a whole community that started, granted, it was a town asset. It was Thompson's Point, but they put in a sewer system, and you can probably guess that there's significant amount of improvement in tax revenues as a result of that. And I think this has the potential to be the same if you look at it as a standalone system, which indeed it is, that's going to be used by very few people. It is a town asset, but indeed I think it will improve the town. It helps follow the goals of the town plan, and just about every possibility, I think our community, and this is my copy of what you guys got today, and this is just the most recent half, so I think if it pops in your head, we've probably already discussed it.
That's great. Well, this is intended to be a work session and opportunity for public input and comments. Also for the select board to discuss and deliberate any edits or proposed changes to this ordinance before it's brought up at the next select board meeting for proposed adoption. Peter Jocelyn's here with the Planning Commission. We have some other wastewater members. I think we have some community members who are stakeholders in the village here. And this would be a good opportunity. Maybe Fritz or Dave, you could run us through a hypothetical application and kind of explain how that process is laid out in the ordinance.
All right, that's probably a good way to basically dive in. So we have somebody located, an applicant and property owner located within the village commercial district that would like to tie into the municipal system. You know, one of the expectations is primarily that they demonstrate that they've maximized their on-site wastewater disposal potential before they come to the town and say, hey, I need help with additional capacity. Some of the properties, it's going to be very easy to determine that there's very little, if no, on-site wastewater disposal capacity because of the character of the soils and what the state of Vermont currently requires as far as standards. Some other properties might be kind of a mix and match between what they do have available on property and perhaps what ultimately their goal is as far as the design requirements for their proposed land use. So one of the initial requirements is that they put together an engineering study completed by a professional engineer that identifies those particular characteristics of their property. And they, once they've completed that, they come to the select board and say, we would like to tie into your system. Here is our evidence of our limited capacity. And at that point, the select board will then review the application and, with the use perhaps of the town's wastewater consultant, come to the conclusion that either they have done their homework or they haven't. Let's presume that they have done their homework, that there is not any additional or what additional flows they need cannot be accommodated on their own property. Then the select board creates a finding of that they have met the particular standard as far as both the need as well as what particular type of land use is proposed. So we're primarily looking to try to augment the village's commercial land uses within the property. So there are some specific land uses that are enabled through this statute. And on the residential end, we have affordable housing as well as senior housing, things that are in the town plan as far as what is being sought as additional land uses that currently are in short supply in town to, through this ordinance, would help support those particular land use goals of being introduced in town. So if the select board finds positively that they can, that they have met that particular standard, then they go to the next step, which is actually preparing a technical application that depicts how the physical improvements would be designed and put into play, and at the same time, there would be an allocation, a preliminary allocation from the select board that could be used in the state permitting. For any time you do state permitting, when you're utilizing a municipal resource, you need to get a letter of allocation from that municipality that basically says that the municipality has the capacity to service that particular need. So that's a letter that has to come from the town. In this particular case, we would suspect it would be select board acting as the sewer board. And similar to you serving as a liquor board, you get also to serve as a sewer board. So, whoopee, yeah. So that allocation letter is an important component for the applicant, because not only do they have to satisfy you as a select board on the technical end of things and how it complies with the allocation ordinance and the use ordinance, but also it also is used for the state permitting. Now, here in Charlotte, currently that is very convenient because we have one-stop shopping as far as the staffing that deals with both of those issues. Once those particular applications have met the technical requirements and are approved by A, the select board, and B, by the state of Vermont, then there's basically a connection permit that is issued by the select board. It basically says you have permission to connect into the system based on the technical design that you provided, and at that point in time, a final connection fee is paid to the town. And right now, the connection fee is based primarily on recovering the costs that were incurred by the town during the initial construction of the collection, conveyance, and disposal system. So currently today, looking out the window out towards Ferry Road, I can see the pump station. So currently, the senior center, the fire department, the library, the town offices all flow by gravity to the pump station. The pump station forces water through a force main under pressure up Ferry Road and then south along Greenbush Road, and then turns left along the ditch line on the Burns property to the old gravel pit. It represents a high point as you drive south, not prior to you getting to the old Lantern, but on the left as you look out prior to getting to the Habitat for Humanity homes. You'll see kind of a rise in the land, and that's where the existing wastewater disposal system is sit today. That particular system has a capacity, original permitted capacity of 5,000 gallons per day. When there was a change in the state wastewater rules, it allowed us to expand that up to 6,500 gallons per day without having to make any physical changes to the system. So that permit is currently still waiting for some technical information to be finalized, but nonetheless, that is a permit that's currently pending before your consultant. And anyways, what we're basically trying to do is create some enough additional capacity to make this whole exercise worthwhile. So when we talk about that wastewater disposal area, there's not only what is out there today as far as physical structures that provide for the disposal of wastewater, but also there's future expansion potential. And based on the gravel deposits that are out in that particular location, we can ultimately go from about 6,500 gallons per day to nearly 15,000 gallons per day of total disposal capacity, just in that one area. There are a number of other satellite systems throughout the town that the town controls, whether it be through easements or, I guess I'll call them easements, or on the Burns property itself, that represent additional capacity beyond that. We're not going to focus on that right now, but as far as this particular applicant that happens to be within the Village Commercial District and is looking to tie in their particular proposed land use and can't do that by themselves without assistance, this is kind of the process of how that all occurs. Once we've gotten the connection fee and their particular system is, they start construction, there's a quality control component where there's a requirement to have a professional engineer inspect the work and provide certification that it was constructed in accordance with the approved plans. Once that is all operational, then we start collecting usage fees. And the usage fees are based on the operational costs of the system. Through the good work of Dean, there was, and yourselves, the most recent assignment of a contract for a more active maintenance of this particular system, and there are costs with that. Historically, the town budget has handled all of that. And really hasn't asked for sharing of costs, whether it be specifically from the library or the fire department or the senior center. It's just kind of been thrown into the management budget. There's the opportunity for us to become more formal as far as ultimately those management costs, and certainly as we introduce third parties into the mix, private parties, it becomes even more important to identify what those costs are and to have them participate in the cost sharing aspect of that. So we see the opportunity as we have more people tied into this particular system that actually the operating costs of the four, I'll call them municipal type connections, that those costs, if otherwise divided out, would be diluted and would be reduced over time. So opportunities for cost savings at the town, not only for the operational costs, but also some cost recoupment, if that's a word, from the original costs that were incurred by the town for the construction of that system. The original construction costs were about $125,000. The way that we computed the connection fees was based on not only that initial cost plus inflation, but also taking into account some reduction in costs, sorry, just lost the word, as far as loss in value because of its
Depreciation?
use. Sorry?
Depreciation?
Depreciation, that's the word. You get the prize.
I was hoping
Yes, you
so.
do. Depreciation. So we tried to take that into account to basically provide a fair share costing of that particular connection fee. Going forward, one thing that this particular system is based upon is using the state of Vermont's basis of design. And this is a cookbook that has recently been updated with the new wastewater rules adopted April 12th of this year. And again, every one of these kind of best guesses at how much wastewater flow somebody will create is exactly that. And there may be some land uses that we think we have good numbers on, but we may find that over time somebody exceeds what we had originally allocated for that land use. We want the opportunity to basically check that. What is very challenging with gravity sewer or even pressurized sewer flows is that putting a meter on those is a very expensive exercise. However, cutting in a water meter on the line that comes from the well is a much more affordable component. And it's a tool that can be used to help the town check on what people are actually using as far as sewer flow. So, or at least on the water end of things, how much water we're using. So what we don't want to get into a situation is when we think we've allocated somebody 100 gallons per day and they're actually using 250, it basically can create secondary impacts on ultimately the the disposal system. So we want to basically make sure that people are paying their appropriate component as far as use of the system, and we needed that checks and balances in there, and that's what the wastewater ordinance has included as part of those tools in the toolbox for the town to make sure that these particular future users are paying their appropriate share towards the use of this particular system.
Now,
So
this will be metered on the well, each individual's well,
that's correct.
and any water will say that's used for the premises will go through that meter?
Well, in this particular case, it's presumed that 90% of your water usage will end up going through the building, being used in the building. There's always going to be situations when you water flowers, it's not going to show up on the pipe leaving the building. But that's where, if there was a land use that specifically did a lot of outside water use, whether it be irrigation or something of the like, we often will ask them to install a second meter if they don't want to be presumed to be using all of the water out of the meter and it showing up as wastewater going to the municipal system. So those are, again, what other municipalities have done in the past for those particular type of land uses when you get into a situation where somebody wants to claim that not all the water they're using is ending up at the wastewater disposal.
Right, I'm just talking about if somebody wanted to fill a pool, I mean, they fill their pool, if they fill it out of their own well, I mean, they've got hundreds of gallons of.
Yep. So
in,
that's
in a day. So.
Yeah, well, that's also why we have a number of administrators here in the town that can be assigned the task of dealing with those requests and management of issues. I can't imagine that there are going to be too many pools that will be served as part
Again,
of this
that was
system.
just an example.
But your point's well taken as far as at least an example
Yes.
of where there could be either a short-term use or something that would not end up creating a drop of water that would go out to the wastewater disposal field.
That's the way
I think all of
Thompson's,
those can be addressed on an as-needed basis, as long as the users are aware that they have an exposure of, every drop of water that in theory comes out of the well is being
Sure.
presumed to go to the wastewater disposal field.
that's how Thompson's Point works. They pay by their water meter
Oh, okay, cool.
usage.
Nice.
So that, in a nutshell, obviously Matt already got bored, he went home.
I don't think that's what happened.
But anyways, that's at least on the sewer allocation. So that's the upfront component that basically
Okay.
says, these are the things that we want to use as tools to make sure that those people who tie into the systems are worthy of this particular public resource that is limited, that we don't have, unlike other communities that have extremely large wastewater treatment plants and they have very large amount of available capacities, that we have limited amount. And at this point in time, until perhaps we can self-fund a future expansion that creates a lot more future capacity, that we've tried to limit the potential people, groups tying in to the ones that are kind of at the top of the list as far as preferred land uses in this particular area. Now, we do have a situation where we have landowners that want to be in the village, and or at least business uses. And there's a component within the allocation ordinance that provides flexibility for the select board to allow somebody who wouldn't otherwise qualify to still be allowed to tie into the municipal system. And we have a land use across the street that is currently proposed. It's been through the planning commission at the sketch plan level, where the proposed health center is looking to locate on a small piece of land right next to the fire department. That particular piece of land itself does not have any on-site wastewater disposal system, but as part of the bigger picture of all the lands owned by Mr. Mason, there is some wastewater disposal capacity way back. In this particular case, the ability for this applicant to tie into some of those remote wastewater disposal systems, or in this particular case where the health center has partnered with the children's center to try to find an on-site wastewater disposal system on yet a third piece of property. They have found that under either one of those scenarios that it is prohibitively expensive.
So it's
Not to
off-
say
so-
on-site wastewater
so it's an
disposal systems
off-site.
are inexpensive.
So it's an
They are
off-site
expensive here in Vermont just because of the very nature of our rules. But nonetheless, with regard to special circumstances, there is provisions in the proposed ordinance that allows the select board to take those things into account to make a determination on whether the proposed land use and the circumstances associated with their particular situation are appropriate or not to facilitate the goals of the town plan. That's a very difficult task. Every situation is different, and we didn't try to create 14 pages of rules that would provide guidance for you. That was one that we basically felt that every situation is going to be incumbent upon the board at the time to make prudent decisions on what makes sense. We provided also, I'm sorry, Lucy.
No,
I'll catch up with you.
keep going. I'm waiting, I have a question,
We
but,
provided more checks and balances as part of that process, where that particular applicant that wants to be heard under the special circumstances exception to first go to the planning commission and have the planning commission provide guidance on whether or not the proposed land use and location and the like are compliant with the town plan and the zoning bylaw in regards to the guidances for that particular zoning district. So what we tried to do is create at least a foundation for a prudent request on at least location and land use to allow the select board to then perhaps build upon that and then deal in more detail with the extenuating circumstances. So we're trying to create a multiple step process that wasn't going to be an easy one that could just kind of run through the board or have 3 out of the 5 say, yeah, sure, go right ahead. We wanted to basically make sure it was a transparent process that had multiple input from multiple town groups to enable a prudent discussion and process for a special exception.
first I have to reveal my cards here. I am a big supporter of both the health center and the children's center getting on to the wastewater system. So I just don't want to make sure that I don't deceive anybody. But here's a question that I have. The feasibility is not, it's not a defined term in the document, but here's the important question. That there are no feasible on-site wastewater disposal solutions. Now,
What section are you?
oh, I'm here. I'm on page 11, step 1. And help me understand it. If I misread it and feasibility is defined somewhere else. But here's the important question. It says no feasible on-site wastewater. Now, does feasibility in that context mean physical feasibility, or does it mean financial feasibility? Because that's really critical. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can all fly to the moon, but we could have this meeting on the moon, maybe.
I think the intention actually was that there was no permittable on-site wastewater disposal. So what would perhaps a potential revision to the language would be that we need to have that particular applicant's engineer prepare documentation on how the system cannot comply with the state wastewater rules that are in place at the time.
But let me just kind of push back on that just a little bit, because to get a permit, isn't it a function of money at some point? I mean, could you, no matter how bad your property is, couldn't you devise something like a big tank and every 2 days someone comes and pumps it out for you? And so, and that's my concern.
Yep. No, I hear you. The actual, the pump and haul option that was in place for about 5 years has been reverted back to municipal type uses only.
Okay,
So it's no longer, there's no longer a solution for a particular property. It's either comply with the on-site disposal capabilities, and at that point in time, you know, if the system is sited in a approximate location to the proposed building, we didn't feel that cost should be taken into account. So it was primarily going to be associated with whether technically you can get a permit, you can design a system that complies with the state rules to meet this particular feasibility standard.
Is that just on site, or is that something that could be purchased on a budding piece of property?
It was intended to be on-site. I mean, right now, if you were to dig a pipe and send it far enough, you could find some sort of off-site solution. Doesn't mean that that is what this particular ordinance asks you to do. It basically says, tell us, based on you being located in the village and us creating this town plan that says the village is an important place to have a number of activities, land uses and the like, that based on us programming this area, and unfortunately some of the properties not being able to readily satisfy the wastewater, on-site wastewater disposal needs, what can be done to facilitate the goals of the town plan. So that's why on-site wastewater disposal is the critical deciding point with regard to that. So again, like I said, you take a look at the wastewater records in town, and there are places where wastewater is being pumped 2,000 feet away. And it solves the problem. It seems convoluted, but it's technically viable, but we're not asking somebody who happens to own or control a piece of property right here in the village to try to go find something 2,000 feet away.
I think part of the intent was to make sure that we didn't waste any proposal. We didn't want someone to, I mean, it's a small finite number that the town has, and don't want someone to say, well, it's easier to use this than it is
Sure.
for you to use mine. We wanted to make sure that you've utilized everything at your disposal before you go to use
on
this
your
tiny bit.
property, on-site means on your property.
Yes.
I read this to my husband, ex-judge and ex-lawyer, and he said you could drive a truck through the word feasible.
Good?
There you go. That's my 2 cents. We may want to tighten that up just a bit. I mean, does feasible mean at any cost? What does it mean? I mean,
There-
and we don't have to solve that right here,
Yeah.
right now. That's my issue.
There are parcels in town that don't have septic capacity, period. I know at least 2 of them that they've presented to the lister's office, and they have engineered statement that says, no matter what we do, we can't use this parcel, can't put any septic
Yeah.
capacity on it. So they then, those 2 that have filed, I think it's 2, have then received the discount because their land is not worth what other stuff may be. So the possibility exists that you just can't do it and follow state rules. So when you're defining feasibility, I think it pertains to, like Dave said, permittable. So maybe we should change that rule. According to the state rules, there's not a chance of putting septic on that piece of property.
Well, I mean, one thing we could do is, because I think that's such a critical piece of this, and is the term feasible is not defined in the term section. So that would be one cure for that, would be to just define that in there. I mean, I wouldn't be pushing this, except I think it's a really kind of central issue here.
I think originally, it was really, I think we were
Excuse me,
thinking,
for the record?
Peter Jocelyn, was it, as Dave said, was there septic that could be permitted by the state on the land, excluding what it would cost to do it? And I think we really came kind of full circle, and we looked at that when we heard more about the issues with the health center and frankly the children's center, which is
These are two businesses that I think we all agree that are what we want in town. And the Children's Center wants to expand, but they can't because they don't have septic. We have the health center that wants to be here, but in their case, it is cost prohibitive. So I think that's why we circled around and basically added this paragraph under feasibility that says if the applicant gets that negative determination, they can make their case. They can make their case to the planning commission as to why this is good for the town. Because I think ultimately that was kind of one of our core principles, that the use should be for the betterment of the town.
Yeah, I agree.
And that then they could go to the select board and make their case. Granted, there's no hard definitions for something like that, and I think that we felt it was better to not have extensive guidelines for the select board for the simple reason that every case is going to be different.
But what I just heard you guys say, and you just stop me, Matt, if I'm talking too much on this, but what I heard you say is feasibility means you can't get a state permit on the property, on the real estate that the project is located. And I think that's,
That was the intent.
okay, then maybe we just need to say that.
So for the engineer who may have written this, he says, is it feasible? Well, if we can get a permit, it is.
Okay.
If it's not permittable, it's not feasible. So I kind of skipped, that's my fault. I
No.
perhaps skipped that particular process. And more background is that we envisioned that after we had gone through the public discussion and revision process, that there would be a review, legal review, to help fill in more of those holes. So that being the background, that's kind of the process that we had envisioned in order to make sure that any ordinance that had been vetted through this particular process ultimately would get a final legal review to basically make sure it's as polished as possible.
I think your next paragraph actually sums it up actually pretty well.
Where are you, Frank?
Where?
Right,
This process shall be.
Page
Page 11, the process shall be supported with a report which summarizes the existing conditions and identifies on-site options and disposal capacity. I think that kind of explains how the feasibility study would be done. So, I mean, I think it's really close.
Yeah, no, I'm just being nerdnik
Well,
about this.
I think
What is
as
the-
far as Louise's point is concerned, is that Frank's point is good when you understand that you can't do any wastewater in Vermont without a state permit.
Permit, okay.
It wasn't always true. Prior to 2007, there were a lot of different ways to basically get a permit. That's no longer the case. But right now, it's not, for the layperson reading this, they wouldn't know that. So I think there's the opportunity to further define what feasibility means to ultimately carry the day.
And that would be adding in a definition between 3.15 and 3.16 that says feasibility, and then define it.
Yep, either feasibility there or just further define it within the step one section. Right. So one way or the other, it needs to be clear what the expectations are, what the requirements are.
Does that mean pragmatically, each applicant would basically be applying for their requested use for a wastewater permit from the state, only to be denied so they could come to the town and say, look, I have a denied wastewater application from the state?
Usually it doesn't actually get to the state level for
Well,
deniability.
The town.
I'm hoping the engineer will
Well,
get there
yeah,
first.
I mean, here's the benefit of the town being involved in the wastewater business on behalf of the state of Vermont,
Right.
is that your staff and your consultant, you can simply just call up and say, so you went out to this property, you looked at the soils, what did you find? And they say, gee, we looked everywhere, we couldn't find anything that complied with the state rules as far as citing a new wastewater system, and this group just is out of luck when it comes to trying to take care of their wastewater needs on property. That would be the cleanest, 2-minute discussion you could have on the phone to help confirm that their consultants' representations that there was no on-site wastewater disposal capacity. The nice thing about the town of Charlotte, that's unlike the state of Vermont, is that in the state of Vermont, the state's representative does not have to go out on property. So you're trusting the professional engineer or the site technician to tell the story. Obviously, their reputation's on the line. They shouldn't be doing anything other than depicting exactly what's going on. But here in Charlotte, it's mandatory that your consultant come out and observe the conditions. So they're looking over my shoulder, the other professional's shoulder, whenever we're reviewing the soils, basically to confirm, that the interpretations, and to basically provide a level of comfort that when an application comes in, that it is going to be viable, or that it's going to be representative of what the on-site conditions are, because they are so critical to a successful system.
Now, on page 4, it talks about the satellite wastewater disposal systems. It talks about senior housing, affordable housing, home conversions, and mixed use. Are home conversions defined as senior housing and affordable housing? Are they defined, or are they going to reference our zoning bylaws? Is there going to be something that is required to be considered as affordable housing? Is there going to be something that's going to be required to be considered senior housing?
Well, right now, there are specific guidelines regarding senior housing and affordable housing in the land use regs. Home conversions, I don't believe so that might need some tweaking in terms of.
So if these could be somewhere referenced that that the definition is in our zoning regulations, that's fine, as they may be updated.
And again, the significance, I think, of those 4, again, we're trying to, again, using the town plan as our guide.
Right.
That in these satellite systems, it's more, it's unique compared to being right in town. But again, by this type of development, it fit the goals of the town plan.
I have nothing against the
Right.
what kind of development. I just want to make sure things are defined, make sure things are falling within the rules that we're trying to adopt here, because and then on page 5, I was looking at where it says change of use. This change of use part, 3.5. The change of use just says an increase in the number of users, employees. So if things go less, does that change it? If there's a change of use to, let's say it is an apartment house and it gets changed to just a single family dwelling again. Now what happens? Does it get kicked off the system? Does it stay on the system? According to your rules right now, single family dwellings can't be on this.
That's right.
So if it can't be on it, if it's not defined as being able to be on it in some way, shape, or form, then what happens to that particular structure when it falls out of not being affordable, not being an apartment, not being senior housing, when it falls into the residential area?
I think you look into the
I'm just looking at this one.
the other ordinance that talks about a little more about the nuts and bolts of enforcing type of effluent, how much effluent, what the use is, and what the possible remedies can be. And I think, worst case scenario, they can be expelled.
And I haven't looked at the sewer ordinance. Are these definitions transferred to the sewer ordinance itself for the use part?
The allocation and the.
From the allocation to the sewer ordinance, are the definitions the same? I mean, not to be mean, but this has been printed up from the last meeting, which was a week ago. I haven't had a lot of time to look at it. So,
that-
bear with me, I'm catching up from months and probably years that you guys have been working on it.
So that was one of the tasks that the committee tackled, was to basically make sure that any terms that were defined in one ordinance were the same in the other. So we didn't have any conflicting interpretations of what I'll just use change in use might be. In this particular case, change in use may not actually be in both ordinances, but in this, but wherever there was a term that was used interchangeably between the two ordinances, we modified them to make sure they're the same. So that was at least one house cleaning component
Okay,
that this
and-
particular committee put together.
And did the terms that are in here, do they coincide with the ones in our zoning ordinances?
So we tried to do that when we could. I'm not
I,
going to claim.
I agree, there are gonna be times where a term that's defined in here can't be defined the same as in our zoning ordinance. But there are some things, I mean, when you talk about, completed construction or, the sewage, and, I mean, there's just some terms here that are defined in our zoning regulations. And I just want to make sure that those terms are consistent. Thank you.
And I had a question along with Frank's, which is going back to the satellite locations on page 4. What is not included in those 4 priorities is commercial. And was that intentional? Because obviously, if you go to the town plan, commercial is
Yeah.
a priority.
Well, it's because all the satellites are in rural areas,
They're not in the commercial, they're not in our,
commercial district.
okay. So that was intentional to leave out commercial there. Got it.
Which is fine, except for we do have the Homoc 1, Homoc 2, and Homoc 3. So if somebody decides they want to do something out in that area, there is a possibility that somebody would want to start their own Homoc business out there.
That's true, but I would still
A home
say,
occupation.
Oh, okay, I'm with you.
that's true, it's a good point, but I would say that home occupation is still secondary to the primary use as
Yeah,
a
And that may definitely be true. I was just
No, I know what you're talking about.
just stating points here.
No, but I thank you for answering that, because
Thank you.
it was intentional. Thanks.
So to go to Frank's point, if it's the type of, if we want to support those particular type incubator land uses or commercial uses, then we should be able to report back to you why that should or shouldn't, why it can or cannot be readily included as a allowable satellite use. So let me take a step back. I think probably what we will do as a committee is reconcile the current state wastewater rules to make sure that whatever the expectations of the state wastewater rules, if they say that you have a home occupation and you want to invite 1 or 2 employees to work out of the house or out of the garage, that under some circumstances you need additional wastewater disposal capacity and sometimes you might not. When you do need additional wastewater disposal capacity and your home does not have a fully compliant wastewater system and trying to expand that to deal with 2 more employees of design flows can be, you can't do it, then the use of the satellite systems is an option for somebody to proceed in that particular direction.
So you're talking about existing or a new business?
This would be a change in use on your property, where you're living in your home right now, and you've started a small business, and you've
I needed no,
gotten to the point
I
where you
needed
need-
no permits.
I'm sorry?
I needed no permits, I needed nothing to start my own
Initially.
home
Yep, that's correct.
occupation 1.
Yep.
and now I've grown enough to where I need to hire 2 employees.
Right. So at that point, what I want to be able to do is advise you on what the state expects, which in turn is going to tell us how important it is to have perhaps these particular types of tools available to that particular person to enable their business to be established as a home occupation. I'm not saying it's going to be inexpensive to utilize one of these satellite systems, but it is perhaps a tool that if they feel the need to come before the select board and say, I really like to work out of my own home and I've got 2 people that are needed to successfully allow me to continue to operate at this particular location, but gee, right next door happens to be a satellite area that have great soils and I can tie into it. Gee, I would like the added opportunity. You know, those are the things that we want to enable the people to come to the select board.
Only because their
You
property.
can't do it
Right.
on their own property. There
I
you go.
mean, that would be the,
Yep. So that, I mean, that's really what the overarching requirement is. Figure out how to deal with things on your own property, and if you can't, and you have this opportunity that you think is really important for you, as far as a business opportunity, expansion opportunity, then come to the select board to see if there's relief by utilizing part of the public resource where the town either owns the property, such as the current property, and there's one of these satellite facilities, areas available there, or there's another piece of land where the town owns those lease rights, and access to that particular area makes sense.
because currently, just if I understand this scenario properly, if someone, without this ordinance in force, if someone wants to and is permitted to in a satellite area have a home occupation with 2 more employees, they can build out their own septic capacities if that's what the state wastewater rules are asking for.
Right, no, that's the first expectation is, the first question that the select board should ask somebody when they come forward and say, hey, I want to tie on to satellite system number 14. And you say, well, have you checked out everything on your own property to basically make sure that you can take care of your own needs there? That's the first expectation. We just can't release capacity that the town has in its control to those people that just want to consume them. We want to have them can be consumed only by those people who don't have the opportunity to take care of their own needs.
I actually didn't realize,
Sorry, Peter just needed a comment.
Well, the satellite systems are kind of off in the distance, but I think it's an interesting example and one I think that has to be handled extremely carefully, because when I think of that, I think of, typically in the village, it's going to be commercial business more than likely. And again, one of the core principles that we looked at as the town plan, and really is this, whoever we're going to provide this septic to, is it for the good of the town? So I think in that case, where you're talking about a residential home that's in a rural area that is going to have an accessory business, I just think we have to be really careful because of folks who might live in the West Village who have septic issues and also want to tie into it. I just think it gets a little bit more complicated when you're talking about, I think, a residential dwelling in a rural area that has an accessory business. I think it's...
I guess the other piece to that I'm understanding with this ordinance is this is not creating a permitted use process. It's creating an application process. And it seems like there are 3 very deliberate points at which the select board can deny those applications based on the complexities of the applications.
Yes, actually, I think you're correct in that we went to pretty great extent to make sure we weren't permitting anything. The ability was to create a tool, as we say, when there is no other choice.
So, and in support of some of the concerns that Peter brought forward is that the last page of the sewer allocation ordinance has a map with it. And this would represent where you're eligible to either be part of the primary service area or part of the secondary service area. And that is, again, either the green, those, where's the camera? Okay, there we go. Oh, Dean's got it, thank you, Dean. Identifies either the core area, which is our village commercial district primarily, or the secondary around it. Sorry, that zoning district around it is?
Sorry, we're asking,
The pink.
to the,
It's the village
West
district.
Shore Village.
Right, we got village commercial and then we have the village district. Okay, so we've tried to basically focus the opportunities for use of these particular public resources within that limited area to basically avoid perhaps some of the discussions of remote areas. There are their own permitting issues that the planning commission and the zoning board has to wrestle with as far as uses in these more remote areas of town as far as home occupations. But putting that aside, and we're not in the business of trying to do the zoning board or the planning commission's job, but when it comes to wastewater, this is basically what we've tried to do is identify where we feel today our focus points would be for these particular two types of service areas for these particular public resources.
I got a question about the capacity allocation. So on page 9, you have numbers for the town offices, libraries, fire rescue, and then you have the senior center and filtration. Are those the accurate numbers?
So basically, thank you, Dean. So we basically have 4 columns. The column on the left is a description of the particular municipal buildings, we'll call them. The second column represents what is permitted today for each one of those land uses. The column in the middle represents what the wastewater committee's recommendations are for increases in design flow to be allocated for that particular land use. And then the third represents the total of both the existing conditions and the proposed increases in flow as the town grows, matures, and the like. You'll see that the top row of town offices, library, and fire and rescue has a moderate increase from the 865 gallons per day that's currently allocated for those particular buildings and land uses, percentage-wise as far as increasing. And then you see the senior center and say, gee, how come that's only 25 or less, or just a little bit more than 10% of the value? Actually, it's even less than that, 1% of the value. And we went and talked to the senior center and asked them exactly what their programs were going to be in the future. And it just turns out that their current programs the design flows far exceed what their needs are. Obviously, whoever created the original permit saw the long-term as far as what perhaps the long-term goals in the programs that the senior center were. So when we actually went and reconfirmed what those long-term goals for the senior center were, we found that the design values were very close to what the actual permit has today.
So that's why this is off.
I'm sorry,
This
Frank?
is the handout. This had 600 gallons in the future
For the senior center?
for the senior center.
What frequently asked
So
questions.
you're up.
Oh. Huh, I missed it.
Yeah, so.
Catch.
So you, sorry, Frank.
This is the handout that we were given.
For the
Oh,
frequently asked questions.
In the frequently asked questions, and it says that the senior center was going to increase by 600 gallons per day.
Well, and that infiltration increase would be 0.
Can I ask a
Oh.
clarifying
And so
question?
the infiltration goes up to 150 in the future, and it's 0 on the handout.
What's, can I ask what infiltration is, because it's not a,
You're right,
Yeah.
there's a conflict there. So
sorry.
I owe you a better answer than that.
And what does
As long as the
infiltration
proper
mean?
numbers get put in there and everything's the same.
That means when your pipes leak and groundwater seeps into them.
Groundwater going in.
Is that what
I'm
infiltration?
I'm
That's
being
infiltration.
nitpicky, but I mean, it's just that.
No,
I like
that's
the-
good.
I like
That's
all the
good,
information to
I think
be,
it's a type,
it may be, or like,
maybe,
But in any case, they should match.
yeah.
well, it was a consistent error.
Yes.
Inconsistent error.
Random
So
error.
tell me what infiltration is again?
But it is important because we want to make sure that the current users that this particular system was designed for are not going to be shortchanged in the future. So that's an important feature of this allocation ordinance, is that we reserve an appropriate amount of future flow for these land uses, and that we don't, again, allocate away the capacity of the system only to find out that, hey, Dave Marshall didn't do his homework, or he misunderstood a situation with the senior center.
is that a
Gee, they really
percentage?
would like to be here, but they can't.
Is that a percentage number?
I'm sorry?
Is that a percentage of the whole system? I mean, is that what it works out as, or is there a complicated formula to come up with this?
Talking infiltration?
The
No, I think I interrupted. you.
infiltration.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, infiltration. So infiltration is a component of the amount of gravity sewer lines that are in the system, the diameter of them. So it's basically length and diameter that helps create the design flow for infiltration. So as more service lines get added by gravity, perhaps from a building to a pump station, we have to allocate that certain drops of water, groundwater, will likely infiltrate the joints of those pipes. And we need to recognize that as being a
Gotcha.
limitation on the disposal capacity of the system.
Gotcha, thank you.
Sure.
I was just,
Could you just state your name for the,
Yeah, Jeff Berger on behalf of the Children's Center. Two questions. One point of clarification. I didn't see the definition of on-site in the regulations, and I was curious what that specifically meant. And then just to, I know feasibility has been discussed, but feasibility has become a large issue for both the Children's Center and the Health Center. And so if there's any ability to expand on that, I think that would be helpful for my understanding, and I assume that the Health Center's understanding as well.
Yeah, I think there's an agreement that we need to do some clarity because it is such a critical issue. And in fact, if you look at the definition section, just looking at it again, on feasibility authorization, it's not consistent with section 8 because it says there's no or limited fees, but it just needs to be cleaned up. And I think that your question is right on, like, what is the intent here? And as I understood the intent, David, is that you cannot get a state permit on your property. Did I get that right?
That's correct. So Jeff, we got beat up pretty bad by Louise earlier as far as
Oh, you've seen
making
nothing
sure
yet.
that we properly define.
I think I was here. I don't think you got beat up too much, David, but,
Nonetheless, the point is well taken that this is a
Okay.
very important decision-making tool that needs to be clearly defined. So I think it's prudent to have additional work done to achieve that goal.
I think that,
but I also think for other parties in the room, I mean, the definition of on-site, I guess, isn't very, so feasibility is one, because that's maybe a financial decision or a distance decision or, that sort of thing, but also you know, if you happen to own a property 10 miles away, does that mean that you have the ability to have an on-site septic? You know, again, I'm speaking for the Children's Center, but.
No, yeah. I mean, just to repeat what I heard, and David can explain that, but what I heard, what feasibility is an engineering, almost an engineering. It does not mean financial, but it is limited to the property that the applicant owns right on site. But you raise a great point, and that needs to be clarified. So, I mean, but that's what I heard. David, did I hear that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
And so I think what we talked about, and what I prefer is to have it be black and white, is 3.15, between 3.15 and 3.16, adding in a definition for feasibility that cites a technical.
Or maybe the
definition.
feasibility study or analysis that's stated in Article 7, number 1 says feasibility analysis. Maybe that could be defined.
As well as feasibility authorization. So maybe looking at 2 more definitions there.
Thank you.
And then just along those lines, obviously, we're going to have other unique circumstances where whether or not we can build on the site that we're anticipating on building in, that's going to be another unique wording, right? Because we will not be able to purchase the land without being able to have septic, but obviously Ben Mason owns 32 acres, right? So there are a lot of nuances here, as Jeff talks about from it too. And as you're thinking about this definition and applications going forward, right? It's going to be an interesting situation for us.
Okay, it's just, Andrea, so I can make sure I understand what you
Yeah.
just told me, was that you have not purchased the property yet.
We would not be able to purchase a property without septic. We'd have to make our purchase contingent on the ability to be able to have septic, right? You can't,
Or wastewater.
oh, wastewater, sorry.
You need septic to
necessarily.
develop. So, I mean, theoretically, you could buy property
Right,
just to buy it, but
right,
you want to develop it, then you need septic.
right. So that will be our necessary
I
pathway.
mean, you can't get a bank loan without septic? And we don't need to go down this track, I just,
Well, I think the nuance there is looking at subdivided parcels as individual potential applicants versus ownership. Is
Right,
that
and
the
our-
difference?
I mean, our intent specifically, we talk about those nuances, was this last paragraph under step 1 feasibility, where it really speaks to if someone, like in your case, because the cost is so exorbitant that you can ask or request reconsideration by explaining to the planning commission how it fits the betterment of the town goals, and then also making your case with the select board. So
That gets into a slightly different discussion for land that's not purchased yet. Because then you're not only defining the future use, but the value of the land being sold, which contributes to the price.
Like,
The land being sold for more than it should be because it costs so much to develop septic? Or is the fact that the cost of developing the septic is cost prohibitive? Which comes first there, the chicken or the egg?
it seems to me that it's, as soon as a ordinance goes into effect, all lands within that map area is affected at the same time.
Yes.
It just depends on whether current landowners apply for subdivided parcels for
Yes.
wastewater permits and find out the feasibility side, or if future buyers do that. But the parcels themselves are treated equally. It really
Yes,
just,
they are.
and the land is not changing its metrics as far as the soils
What
that are
can be done
there.
there? Yes, that's correct.
but the conundrum that, Andrea, that I heard you're in is that it's that you can't buy the property without septic or wastewater permit, and you can't get a wastewater permit without owning the property.
That is my concern.
Right. And some properties, let's say, totally removed, in Moncton, the person might develop their property by going through not just a subdivision process, but also spec drilling wells and getting wastewater permits for two of the parcels that they subdivide, but not for 4 others. And to Fritz's point, that changes the purchase value of those parcels, based on what's proven for them, driveway, power. And so that changes in the free market what that parcel is worth. But that's, I think the ordinance would be there as a mechanism that can be used by any landowner for any
That's
parcel
correct.
within this area.
Yes.
And so what's different here also, to your point, Matt, is that in the rural district, you're right, it's all of those factors, land-based factors that dictate the developability, but there's the added piece in town, which is, does it fit within the, does it fit the criteria that we assigned for providing allocation, and does it really fit within the plan of the town plan? Unlike out in East Charlotte or West Charlotte, where it's residential and you need septic and you need water.
Yeah.
Yeah, that paragraph allows the town to make the decision whether you want to build an arena for the NFL or not, and you think that arena is going to benefit the town by bringing in jobs and everything else, then you rationalize giving away half of your tax income and the best real estate for this stadium. But that's a process that happens throughout the country, and that's what that last part of the I don't know even which one, they all run together, that allows if you've been turned down because you can't get a permit, but you really want that stadium, it gives the select board the chance to hear your case. You want the stadium because you're all gonna get rich, and if they can convince us, then it works. But that's the intent of that last, after you've had what we call a negative feasibility.
Dean, can you bring up the map again? Now, why does the green why does it shrink down before it gets to Route 7? What is the reasoning behind that?
I think we all recognize those, it very well could have just gone through consistent with the zoning. Those are all full wetlands. So for consistency purposes, should this be changed back to be consistent with the village commercial district? I think for transparency purposes, it probably could and should be. But the reality is that we've had the parcel on the north delineated as far as wetlands, and it's all wetlands. So that's why it's not a green area. That's the only answer I can give you.
And the rest of the green, on the most part, this looks like it follows property lines.
It's either property lines or the village commercial district.
Okay. 'Cause, it cuts out parcels that, if you look at the parcel there on Greenbush Road, there's a small parcel there that's pink right across from 2 green. Now, I don't know I don't have in front of me what the commercial village area is. I'm just trying to make sure that, again, we're trying to stay consistent with our zoning bylaws, with the map that's in there, with this map to try to, and I know it's not gonna be exact because of the way the septic is installed, and this is I'm just trying to make sure there's consistency.
I believe Mr. Kinney is correct. My understanding when we were going through his processes is defined by how many feet away from Ferry Road are, because we had to get that measured back, and so it probably is a straight line. I think it is different than that.
Just to check it, to make sure that we're consistent, that's all. I'm just trying to make sure that when somebody goes in for a septic permit, that when they're doing it through our zoning bylaws, that everything is consistent. So when the zoning board or the planning commission looks at this information, they know that it's in that district, and it's in that, and it's within the septic area.
So what you're looking to see is to have the primary service area match identically the village commercial district.
I don't know if it's gonna match identically, but I mean,
Well,
I just wanna, I wanna make sure there's a comparison.
So I think that's probably the best discussion point we can have is, the background is that we did rely upon the zoning districts as an important component of identifying the primary surface area and the secondary area. Nothing in the ordinance says you have to include all of one or all of the other in the green or the pink area. But it is worthy of discussion of, if it's not consistent, how come? Does that achieve a certain intent of the town plan or not? Again, another important tool in regards to why we're proposing to create this particular ordinance. So I think it begs the question of, is this the map we want to adopt? And is it one based on either full compliance with the zoning regulations, or is it a modification of one? And somebody, that one person, that property owner that's been left out is going to say, how come? Gee, I'm in the village commercial district, but how come you didn't include my property? And this is not the only community that discussion occurs in.
I'm sure.
But we should have that discussion as part of this vetting process to basically make sure that we're all comfortable with what's being depicted and why it's being depicted the way that it is.
I think the other thing just with that map that I would want you to all be aware of is that the LaBeouf property straddles that, and it has components that are both in the commercial and not, it's known not to have septic capacity on that, or limited, for the school growth. So I do think that you would want wording to think about what happens when you have a large property straddling in the commercial zone, and would the town be responsible for all, potentially for all that septic, or, because that will be a unique thing that will probably come up at some point.
Is that, can you point that out?
South side of Prairie Road.
Okay, got it.
See, there's no black line there?
Yeah, I see it.
And that's because the property extends
Got it.
extensively back.
Okay.
Is it Knife Road on the side?
That is the Mason property, and that extends back further.
And it goes into that. I mean,
Right.
the Children's Center now property, but previously the Happy Valley, which is to the northeast of that corner.
So I wanted to ask, if I could,
Please.
about that property. Is it my understanding that Happy Patrick sold you at a very good price, or gave it to you, the Children's Center, specifically for septic, so that you could do more on that side, on the north side
That
of
was
Ferry
the
Road?
intention.
That was the intention. So did you accept that gift from her?
Yes.
Is that part of the Children's Center property now?
Yes, it is.
So if you talk about on-site, you have on-site.
I think what the ordinance is looking at is that it's a separate parcel.
Uh,
Right.
Someone can own 10 parcels
Uh-huh.
in town, but they don't all count towards an application for one parcel
Okay.
looking for.
So
So what I would be getting at, though, is why would we not want to use septic capacity on the north side for your development of both? Why would we not want to use that versus using up on the other side that has the potential for other people and I'm not the one, I'm asking this question to you, but I was asked this question myself, so I'm just speaking for other people. I'm here for you, but I'm here for them too. So I wanted to know why
If I
we
could
can't
speak
use
to
it on the
that, I
north.
think, if I understand you, you're saying, well, the parcel just on the west side, the Happy Patrick that runs all the way up and there's septic up in the, way in the back, I guess.
Dean, can you help us out here? Yes.
It's along East Allen Highway.
And
right around
so if the children's center said, okay, we're gonna put in septic, right, we want more septic. So it's actually the same story as the health center, right? The health center, there's no septic on their land, but they want to use the septic that's way in the back on Ben Mason's property. So then, in their case, it became cost prohibitive to do that. So the way that the allocation ordinance was originally written, basically they would have been denied because it was so expensive. Or because they had access to septic, they would have been denied. They would have had to spend, or they would have to spend $100,000 to bring that septic down. So that was why we added this option, so that in this case, if they were denied because we said, oh yeah, you have septic there, you can use it, they would have the opportunity to request reconsideration based on their circumstances, make their case to the Planning Commission and make their case to the Select Board. And again, it's centered on, for the betterment of the town, how does it meet the criteria of the town plan? So it's very specific in terms of weighing the value of providing any septic or not.
Okay, so couldn't more people hook on to the system that you would provide? Couldn't
So that's-
somebody on Greenbush Road go, you know?
That's what entered into my question about the value of the land. Because it's so expensive to hook into the septic to make that piece of property valuable, which one is it? Is it because it's too expensive for it to be a valuable business, or is it because they're selling it for more than the market value? If the market value says that it's too expensive to get the septic there, then it's not worth perhaps the money. Which gets into a bigger question in the way they define parcels and contiguous land. Because when you're taxing a land, you don't tax every parcel as though it has a home site on it. If you own 5 parcels together, you get your one home site, and the other 4 parcels are considered surplus land. So they're taxed at a lower value. Now, if you start assigning the ability for septic by parcel definition as opposed to contiguous land, you get another question of what is the value? Are you increasing?
If you have 5 parcels, even if you only have one homestead, you're still taxed more than if it's one parcel of the same acreage.
No.
No, your tax bill will come, if you have 5 acre lots and you have a house on one, your tax bill says you get billed for a house, 2 acres for your home site, and the other 23 acres. In your tax bill, it's usually one tax bill.
So what?
No different than if it was all
Yeah.
Now, you
one
can sell
property,
them separately,
unsubdivided.
you still have the ability to sell them separately, but according to taxes, it's one.
It's one
bill.
until you sell it. Once you sell it, then the value changes. And the reason that is a question in my mind is because a lot of the objection to this process is like, why are you making somebody's land more valuable than mine with a town asset? So to thoroughly investigate that, these things all kind of tie together, and there's not a clean answer.
Nor is it a new question.
Right.
To David's point, I mean, communities, especially neighboring communities have kind of been going through this. Just to add to that layer, from the select board's perspective, I continue to separate my opinion as a citizen with my responsibility as a representative for the town. And coming up with private development considerations as a select board member is something I'm trying not to do when I'm helping to develop an ordinance and a mechanism for people in town. Private development considerations are for people interested in developing things privately. The ordinance is a mechanism to allow people without recourse in this village commercial district, the ability to have added septic capacity. If they don't have that within that parcel, what are we as the town offering as a mechanism so that they can?
To Peter's point, the desire to, per the town plan, for it to be a community center.
That's my view exactly, which is it comes down to what's our strategic analysis of vision under the town plan. And that we
So
want
that-
to advance that.
That decision solely ends up with the select board and not this ordinance, because it says if you've been denied, you can always go to Plan B and talk to the board first going through the planning commission.
So what else do we envision when you are talking about this area? What else are you hoping will settle in the village? What more do we need?
That's
Where, is there,
whatever it is somebody wants to propose.
Commercial
I know,
business,
you
maybe
said,
a little-
but I need a
maybe
visual.
Maybe a little pub or something. I mean,
okay,
it's hard to
besides
know,
a
like,
pub, what else
it
is
could
there that,
be- It could be some kind of office, it could be another law office, like Mike up on the corner. You know, that was a great example of adaptive reuse,
Yeah.
where the Charlotte News moved in there. Mike's, I forgot the name of the gloves, but he moved in there. So there could be other, I mean, I don't know what,
It's-
necessarily what they all
That-
are.
That's
I
not
didn't
our
know that was
decision,
part
that's,
of discussion when you're.
No.
The old brick continues.
Whatever can be applied for in the village commercial. You know,
Yeah.
We used to have
permitted
we used to have a bookstore. Maybe there could be another small bookstore,
Yeah,
children's books, something like a Flying Pig.
I didn't know if you were envisioning more than what you just spoke of, or when you were talking about things, you,
I don't think that was a consideration as to what the use it would be. The uses would be defined by
the land.
whatever exists, whatever the town plan says, whatever the planning and zoning say, that wasn't a consideration for the ordinance.
Right.
It's like
And the
if
other thing, I didn't realize we were gonna open up the satellite areas. I thought we were just going to talk about, the Burns property. I didn't know. we
Well,
were
those are,
discussing satellite at all.
Those are future options.
yeah. I mean, in
And
an
nothing
effort,
says you
Yeah.
can't, take a step back and say, time out, let's just focus on the Burns property and go from there. So
This is
that is still a
the first
policy.
time.
You know,
Okay.
that's the
Yeah.
beautiful job that you have, is you get to help mold public policy in regards to the directions that we go. So right now, we tried to provide opportunities to take advantage of all the resources, wastewater resources that the town has in this particular part of town. But you may feel that it's just not appropriate to go there. So nothing says that this has to be the final version. It's a recommended version, and that's part of the process here.
Hey, I got a couple of questions. One, on page 9, it says only properties located in the village commercial district
Where are you?
Busted.
are eligible.
There you go. Right, So
I'm
it's,
sorry,
so it
but
should
I-
be within
It
these.
says,
Primary service
on
area.
page 9,
Yeah,
Okay.
in 5.2, it says allocation. The third line says, only those properties located within the village commercial district are eligible for allocation in the municipal collection and disposal system. I'm assuming that's the one at the Burns property. Because the other one that we're going to consider the satellite systems.
Correct.
So satellite systems aren't currently being considered.
So that's
Yes.
one.
that's the intent.
And then on the next page, on 5.3, you've changed senior housing to elderly housing. We can stay consistent, please.
You afraid you're going to be confused?
I would get confused.
I know.
And then, have we even looked at this feasibility analysis request form on page 12. Do we know anything about that, what it's gonna look like? It has a list here of what it shall have in it,
Right.
but have we even attempted to come up with a block form for this?
Well, it says prescribed by the board, so that looks to me like a hot potato to have us come up with an application.
So, as far as
I
how,
was hoping for help from
the answer is,
from the committee.
right, the answer
I
is
think they've done
no, a form has not been developed. We find that in these particular legislative processes that the guidance is put out and then the administration puts together the form. So we didn't want to get too far ahead of ourselves on that end of things. So that's our excuse, but nonetheless, the real answer is a form, a draft form has not been developed.
And is there a fee schedule for this? Because it says there's an application fee for the feasibility application. And so is there an application fee for anything else and all?
We initially developed one, we have not forwarded that on, but we can do that
Okay.
as part of follow-up information.
It's form following function, which I think is the right.
Thank you.
Like I said, I'm just hitting this as I'm going through it. There's a lot to
think we
read
give-
here.
Bowden some crayons and make him come up with a form.
I came up with more.
Start from there.
forms.
So Dave, how does this get administered? Like through a new wastewater manager? Do we create a new position in town? Do we add to someone's existing that's already working? Because sometimes I see that I feel like there's a fair amount of work, and how do other towns take care of that?
When we had that discussion, you looked at the realistically of how many parcels you're gonna have to be dealing with. You know, if you were dealing with 200 meters that you needed to check, you're probably gonna need another person. The crystal ball as to how many people would be jumping into this program right away. It might not be anybody that wants to use it for 5 years.
Okay, wait 1 second. So we can use this whole area can use
The green
the
area.
ability, just the green. What happens in the pink area in the future?
That was where some of the satellite systems are.
But it says secondary service for
Here,
this
I think
pink.
the secondary service spoke to, as Dave mentioned at the outset, the complete build-out of the septic that's back there to go from 6,000 to, I think it's 15,000.
And then it would service the pink area, Peter?
It could potentially service outside.
but that's-
It will, as we go forward, building.
well, it would
over
need
the
new
years.
language in the ordinance to be adopted.
Okay, but,
And it would still depend on how many places hooked up. I mean, there's no
but
way to.
eventually that many places could hook up.
Yeah, but the
I don't care
priority,
if they do or don't.
Well, they can't without the ordinance
I-
changing.
and the priority in the ordinance is for senior housing,
Yeah.
affordable housing, and something else. There's
Yeah,
just a
commercial.
priority list.
Commercial and,
No, it's
But
not
10
commercial.
years
mixed
from
use.
now, this could get built out
Change of
more
use.
with different language, is what you're saying.
Well, the whole town could be a
Well, yes.
municipal with different language. I mean, it would have to have the political will to do that, to change the ordinance.
Okay, very good.
But what I see for work, to that question, is I'm seeing, because I'm thinking from an agenda perspective, I see 3 agenda items per parcel, per request. It looks like, one, the select board would have to deliberate and vote on a feasibility authorization, which would come with a form that the applicant would put together. That would come before the select board. It'd be in the meeting packet. It would get discussed at a meeting. I would assume the first few would be relatively meaty sessions, 45 minutes or something like that. So it would have to pass a feasibility authorization vote. Then the applicant would come back with a preliminary application of design flows based upon their specific request or need, that would be on an agenda item, and the select board would vote on that up or down. And if it was up again, it would come back to the select board for a connection authorization, which would have construction costs, probably construction plans, and
There's a
a
sewer.
verification system that the select board, it would be a contract that the select board would then authorize before any connection occurred. So that's, to me,
So
that's
there's
like
a
the
sewer,
work and
there's
the
a sewer
timing.
connection request form.
Right, that's the last one. So that would be 3 meetings, 3 votes, 3 stages of work that would go into an applicant connecting to the existing municipal system. Am I seeing that right?
Yes.
Under this ordinance?
Which was part of our discussion, was to make sure we don't make this too hard, that it's a exercise in futility. You come up with, it's amazing in all the meetings, everybody can come up with any number of things that are a good idea, and then you have to sit back and say, well, you know,
How that works?
yeah, it's so tough, everybody's gonna say, oh, forget it. So there's a kind of a balance that was a topic of discussion frequently.
We
We're
could do a
making this
little-
too hard.
Yeah, but we could do a little guide to it too, you know.
Sure.
We could do a little guide to it. How do you kind of walk yourself through this? 'Cause it
I'd
is-
somebody recommend that we have a subcommittee look at, at that.
Yeah, no, that's it too,
You know, just totally fresh eyes, nobody in this room, or, I just have a few things that people have said to me over the last few days, and,
I think we have time for some more of them if you
well, I
want.
don't necessarily need to do that right now,
The select board can always delegate.
I don't wanna,
I mean, a subcommittee, you need to make sure that at least
I don't know.
some people have an idea, because the allocation isn't too bad. You start getting into the nuts and bolts of putting it together and understanding the different kinds of effluent and stuff like that. There's some things that there should be at least one person of
Civil engineering degree.
significant knowledge to understand that
Okay,
gallons per
just-
day aren't always the same. It depends what the gallons are made of.
It was just a thought, like, somebody had
No, the process with the reviewing of the applications, it has town staff reviewing the application, and it says if the application is found to be deficient, the applicant shall be notified by the board with an explanation of why the application was deemed incomplete. Well, the board didn't look at it,
10.3.2.
so.
Who's the one looking at it?
So would it have to be, it would be notified by the board, or would it be notified by the town staff on behalf of the board? I mean, it's just, I mean, unless the board's gonna look at an application to see if it's complete after the staff has.
Well, in this particular, I think that's an opportunity.
And that's a process thing, I know.
Let me perhaps answer the question as far as how most municipalities handle a situation like that. To answer Carrie's question, which I did not earlier, she said, well, what staffing in other municipalities handle applications of this particular type? And usually those are going to be associated with a zoning administrator, or if the community's large enough, now let me take a step back. There's one other community in Vermont that's similar to Charlotte, where they have chosen to administer wastewater themselves, and on behalf of the state, and that's Colchester. So Colchester has a wastewater manager, reviewer, and their job is to take applications, review them, determine if they're complete. If they're not, they get sent back, and you know, that particular process is not sent up to the select board. It's basically administered administratively without burdening the board. We felt that in this particular case that It should be a combination of process, only because it's a public resource that is limited in capacity, that there are certain opportunities for non-technical review, which is the exemption process that we had here, where we envision that your administrator / health officer would be the point person, only because they're very familiar with many of the other application processes here in town, and that would be a natural extension of their particular job description. But the decision-making process would ultimately be borne by the select board. If we felt that this was a daily exercise where applications would be coming in daily for this particular type of thing, I think we might think about this alternately, but the practicality here in Charlotte, based on our demands for development, or the limited opportunities for individuals to take advantage of this particular proposed ordinance, I think was so limited that we just didn't envision it was going to be overly onerous to ask the zoning administrator / health officer to take on this particular application process. So I do envision that they could be the vetter of an application form that basically said, gee, you've put in an application, you've only answered half the questions. I can't even send this to the board. I'm not going to waste their time denying you. Please go back and fill out the application form completely, and we'll then deem it complete and process it accordingly. I think that's really the best way to basically minimize to be most efficient with your time with this particular process.
Right, and that's why I was stating that it would be something that the town staff,
Yep.
either, I mean, we could say the select board or authorized representative. I mean,
So
just-
Frank's pointing out on section 10.3.2 that rather than being notified by staff, we've put the board in there. So
Well,
if
you
it's
put,
deemed,
you put the board in there.
no, I'm saying that, but I'm saying that based upon your point, I
Right.
think it would be prudent to allow this to remain administrative
Agreed.
until,
It's
you know,
ready,
at least the application is deemed complete.
complete.
Right,
I
I'm ready
agree.
to look at, I
Yes.
agree too.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, there's, yeah.
That's it.
So our brand-new zoning administrator will be,
Well, he has to do that with all zoning permits and everything that comes in anyways, that goes to the zoning board or regular permit. He has to make sure that everything's complete.
It's really
Already.
verifying that a form is properly filled out.
That's right.
okay. Good with that.
And Matt, just to reinforce your point about basically the 3 steps, yep, you have that document. This is Dean, this is the process and notes, sewer allocation and use ordinances, and what it basically identifies for a layperson that just is initially starting in the process. This would be something the zoning administrator could give them and say, okay, these are the first steps. And if you want to understand the details of those steps, the particular portions of the ordinances, whether it be the allocation ordinance or the use ordinance, is referenced so that somebody can then pull out the thicker document and dive into it in more detail. So,
This committee, just, this hasn't come up at all. Some of the things the select board approves require site visits. Is that something the committee ever discussed or thinks there's value of? I have my own opinion, but I just wanted to ask.
I don't think we discussed it much, but my assumption would be that development and site visits would be done by the planning commission, because that's typically what they do, and this would involve, most likely, some sort of site plan for almost any use,
Yeah, I agree.
and they would have to go look.
And that would, we would wait for a recommendation from the planning commission.
Yes.
And the wastewater determination
Right.
also sometimes need to say that.
Right, but the sewage control officer could do most of the site visits. That's what they do. So,
Dean?
Is there, the provision for a project that receives a negative determination from the board because of lack of on-site disposal, it goes to the planning commission. Should that, I can imagine, somebody developing a project, they have to go through this project process of denial first and then go to the planning commission? Would it be desirable to go to the planning commission first, get that support ENA before going through the process of going to the board?
They
What number
are,
are you on, or where are you?
Well,
Sorry, yeah, this is in the feasibility section, page 11. That last paragraph, step 1.
With that,
I think, the thinking, Dean, is that since more than likely, I can't think of a reason why any of this development and the request for access to the septic they'd end up doing a site plan anyway, I think. So I think that speaks to you.
part of the
Question.
point in including that in the process was to make it just not solely a decision by 5 people. Because hearing what I hear, it's like, well, okay, if 3 of the people on the select board were your friends, then you're a done deal. So the thought of adding that was to help, part of the thought was to help spread the process out amongst different committees, different peoples, to make it a little more, easy to, honest, or to eliminate the appearance of impropriety.
I think also maintaining an appellate path is an important mechanism in any public process, and to preempt it with an early determination by another town body, doesn't allow that pathway to exist if there
Peter,
is a select board denial.
do you know of a situation that would require, we'll say, just conditional use and didn't need a full-blown site plan?
Well, I'm trying to think of an instance where a site plan wouldn't be required in
Yeah,
a commercial
that's all.
district, so I think
I mean,
I think that covers what you're saying, Dean, in a way, in that
I guess
it seems it might be a little awkward if they were to come to the planning commission specifically just about wastewater and then go through site plan. Because the
Well-
wastewater may not be an issue, it may have some.
well, would there be something that you'd want to put in our ordinance that says that if you're going to hook on to the municipal system, you must go through site plan? I mean,
I guess
I'm
that's-
just trying to figure it out like you are, Peter,
I know,
I'm not sure.
And I'm trying to think of an instance where any development in the commercial district right now wouldn't go through site plan, other than, say, the children's center, which wants more capacity.
Right,
That wouldn't fall under site plan, because they're not changing the use.
right.
But
They're
any
not-
other,
they're not changing the use, but they're expanding the use.
they're expanding.
So the question would be if, this is extreme, but if you went from 30 children to 60 children, do you need more parking spaces? So,
And then they would go through, yeah. then they-
so that's a site plan. I think
I
if
guess
I
it-
can answer the question a little bit, when we are, when somebody is looking to develop a piece of property, one of the first things we recommend is, do you have any on-site wastewater disposal? Because if you don't, you're not doing anything. So I think the framework of this particular process was, with that in mind, figure out your own wastewater needs. And then if you run into a problem, then you go to the planning commission. Typically, the first thing you do is find your wastewater, and if you've got wastewater, then you can start to develop your plan for initial sketch plan review by the planning commission, and then moving up through the process. In this particular case, what we're basically saying between the lines in this particular ordinance is, as part of that initial phase of wastewater, figure out what you've got. If you don't, then you get to have a discussion with the planning commission, at least on whether or not what you're proposing makes sense as far as compliance with the town plan and the zoning the zoning bylaw as it relates to purpose and use. So I think that's kind of the thought process with regard to how things work in the real world and how they would be applied, no pun intended, with this particular process. But otherwise, Peter kind of was saying, I was reading between his lines, that said, well, don't you always come to the planning commission first? Or Dean was saying, why don't you always come to the planning commission first? Because they'll provide you guidance on what to do. But there are many situations when, before we even want to bother the planning commission, we try to figure out whether there's any on-site wastewater disposal potential on the property. Because if there's not, why waste everybody else's time? So that's a little bit of the framework on how processes work when it comes to proposed development of properties.
So is the second thing on that piece of property water, fresh water, or well?
It is.
Capacity?
Water is
Second.
just as equally a critical component, but in 90% of the time, we find that wastewater is the limiting component. As you get closer to the lake and you get into the more shales and the limited capacity of the aquifer, we do find that those areas are just as critical as wastewater, on-site wastewater disposal. But in the other 90% of the properties, we don't find that that's the case.
Well, there's 1 hour and 50 minutes of great conversation.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, I am, speaking for myself, I am in awe of the hard work that you and your committee did. And you know, it's what makes this town work, and thank you. Thank you, even though we've asked, you know, I'm sorry if I've given you a hard time.
Thank you.
Yeah, but those questions, those hard questions do have to be asked and answered.
Sure.
There's no
Absolutely.
way going forward without doing that.
Right,
So
absolutely.
this is one of a few meetings. We're going to have several meetings, few meetings, some more meetings at least, right? So-
Yeah, it looks like we have an hour next Monday. The committee is, I assume, is not scheduled to meet between that time. Does it make sense to do some of the copy edits and the structural edits that we just talked about tonight?
Well, there's some, poor Dean has had to work with me before. There's some minor typographical stuff which I would give him.
Yeah, I think
kind of stuff.
that would be great to add in. In general, we've just kind of given a blank check to
Yeah. I mean, I
typos
think
and
you know what our
structure.
concerns are.
Does it make sense to have general counsel take a first look at this before Monday's meeting? And have a
Not
first
there yet.
crack at comments?
I think that's probably premature. I think
I do too.
this needs to stew a little while.
So
An hour might not be necessary. My guess would be, we can make some edits, people can see the copy. Maybe now that we've had this discussion, some more questions will come to mind.
and the wastewater committee will be meeting the following Monday, the 19th?
Yes, that would be our normal schedule. We haven't scheduled it yet, but that would be our normal schedule.
Normal schedule, right, that's what I'm operating on. And at that meeting, kind of
After that.
the meat of that meeting would be reconciling state wastewater rules with the town ordinances. Any further structural edits that the select board and community comes up with after the meeting on the 12th?
Define on-site, defining feasibility, make sure everything's tied into planning and zoning.
And with the.
See what we wanna do with the map.
And with the sewage ordinance too, the use ordinance, make sure everything's, the same across the board here.
We did that one between the two ordinances. I'm not saying that we didn't miss it, but there was a,
Right, but whatever we
Comparison of
change,
those
whatever
two.
we change in this one, we wanna
we
make sure we
changed
change.
both of them, yeah.
Both of them.
I mean, I feel that we shouldn't burden the committee with all of the edits and everything. Clerical stuff. They shouldn't be burdened with that. I mean, it's just our big picture items that they need to look at.
That the ordinance
And I'll help with
mechanics of
editing.
it work.
I'll help with the editing.
So that'll be the 19th, then we're looking at the next regularly scheduled select board meeting would be the 9th.
Well, the 12th and the 26th?
So the 26th would be after their meeting on the 19th.
Right.
So we'd want a chunk of time on the 26th agenda as a select board.
Probably to review the answers to the questions presented.
Yeah.
What's the definition of feasibility? Type of thing.
Yep.
Be more explicit.
Sounds like a work plan for the month. Gonna be busy.
So you said that it's on the agenda for the 12th and then the 9th?
The 19th would be the wastewater committee meeting.
Right, so
And
the
the
12th is the regular meeting of the select board.
Right.
We'll deal with typographical and other corrections that we can address at that particular point in time, and also the guidances as far as definitions, policies, and the like. We'll work on those on the 19th during the committee's regular meeting, and then out of that meeting, forward to the select board, our recommendations and findings for consumption at your regular meeting on the 26th.
I think you should leave sometime on the 12th because some questions might walk in the door that didn't come in tonight.
I'm sure.
Something I wanted to say at the last meeting, and I forgot to. I just wanted to thank you, Dean, for writing the train center has been painted over. The graffiti was all painted. And I know that you sent out an email, but at some point in time, it has gotten cleaned up, at least certainly better than it was.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. It was a productive meeting.
Thank you for your time.
No, thank you, guys.
Motion to close the meeting?
Second,
Yep, second,
Aye.
third.
all those opposed?
Oh, all right, if we have to.